Welcome to Taste Buds. I'm Debra Eckerling, goal strategist, writer, and foodie. And today I'm speaking with Alex Schumacher, who's author of the graphic novel, The Effects of Pickled Herring. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks, Deb. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, and I'm grateful to be here.
Well, contrary to what the title might lead people to believe, The Effects of Pickled Herring, there's plenty of food in the book, but it is not actually a food book.
No, it's not. It sort of incorporates for me. It's sort of what food has symbolized to me a little bit throughout my life. Growing up in a Jewish family, having a very stereotypical Jewish grandmother and Jewish mother. There's piles of food everywhere. So the foods that I share in the book, come from a place of nostalgia and love, which was what I was trying to bake into the book, into the story. Was that kind of nostalgia and love. So the title is a little misleading, though there is a very specific reason that it is the title.
All right. Why pickled herring?
So pickled herring, it's one of those old school, old world dishes that I think a lot of Jewish kids and kids of any culture who have family around them that are maybe from a different country or from an origin country, and they bring those traditions and those recipes with them. So I feel like most cultures have a relationship with food, and for Jews, it's certainly for Ashkenazi Jews it's a lot of the Eastern European type of food. So it's the liver and onions, and it's the pickled herring and pickled other things. So it was this way to kind of bridge those generations. And it's not necessarily, looming large in the main character's life as far as a staple of his own diet, but it's something he associates very closely with his grandparents and in particular his grandmother. So that association for him is what makes the title significant, and the sort of minimal inclusion of the pickled herring in the book, because it doesn't necessarily need to be there anymore. But it is still a very important part of the book because it's more about the familial ties that the food creates.
And so, what is the book about?
Right.
If not pickled herring, what is the
Yes.
book about?
The book is about a young boy, 12-year-old Micah, who is preparing for his joint B'nai Mitzvah with his sister, Alana. So they're 10 months apart. They're on this year-long preparation, as many a Jewish kid has experienced. And they're tweens, they're 12 and 13 years old. So they're still figuring themselves out, figuring out where they belong in the world, figuring out where they belong in their community, both socially and culturally. And while all of this whole maelstrom is happening in their minds and in their lives, they find out that their grandmother is starting to develop Alzheimer's. So it throws this big monkey wrench in, not only their lives, but their planning for the B'nai Mitzvah. So hilarity and heartbreak kind of ensue from there, but it's an exploration of the strength and the love of families and what can bring them together and keep them grounded in one another. And a big part of that for my family and for Jewish families is oftentimes food. So it's the meals that you have together, and it's the foods that you give to comfort and heal. So those were always going to be pretty big elements in the book, if not main focuses. But the biggest through line is that parallel between a sort of literal coming of age event, the bar mitzvah, and a very, worldly event that sort of ages you a little bit, and, a real life coming of age with the Alzheimer's. So there was this beautiful parallel that I saw between the two. And that's what kind of turned this book into a love letter to my faith, my community, and my grandparents, who are unfortunately no longer with us. But this was a way for me to immortalize them a little bit too, because they meant a great deal to me, and I grew up with them.
Eh, What a beautiful tribute. And not everybody gets to do that.
Yeah,
So that's amazing. So, how true to life is the story that you tell in the book?
they're sort of half recollections. I like to say, because it's based on sort of hazy memories, and I didn't want it to be memoir. So it's more Romana Clef is the device, where you take sort of events that happen in real life, but you make them into fictional storylines and events that happen. So it was more like that, and I was just kind of collecting memories, and I found that something that was really important for me and kind of profound in a way was roping in my family to give me their memories of my grandmother and also my grandfather. It mostly focuses on the Alzheimer with my grandmother. So it was recruiting them to kind of come on board and remember them, and it didn't wasn't necessarily intentional, but became this kind of beautiful remembrance of what my grandparents meant and what my grandmother was both before and after Alzheimer's, and the beauty in both of those sides, because you have to look at the positive. I think in life it can be very daunting otherwise. So yeah, it became this really beautiful kind of family group activity where we collected all these memories, and a lot of those revolved around food, because they always had these little bowls of like candies, wrapped candies, or sometimes open like trail mixes, which was probably odd to people who were guests, but they usually had that out for the family. So there was, yeah, always food everywhere.
And why a graphic novel? Because that seems like a really unique way to tell this kind of a story.
Yeah, it's absolutely a unique way and something that I've always enjoyed. Illustrating and writing stories were something that I've enjoyed since I was very young, and I sort of skipped around in my 20s and 30s to try out different modes of storytelling. But in my mid 30s or so, I came back to comics because it just always felt kind of like home for me as far as storytelling format goes. And so the blend of the art and the images, I guess, and the text is such a specific and singular way to tell a story like this, where you're not spending 2 pages describing an emotion that a character is feeling. You can just show it. So there's an economy of both space and words, but if you do it correctly, it's so impactful, to express it in that way. So comics have always been, and there's, part of it is there's, I think, a lack of literacy taught, specifically in North America, about graphic novels. So we still kind of think of it maybe in a different light than books, or prose books rather. But they're just as useful and just as beautiful of a storytelling format. And I think personally, I think people should read more graphic novels because it's just a unique way to absorb a story and have it given to you. So yeah, there was never a question in my mind it was going to be a graphic novel.
And what do you hope people get from your very personal but digestible, serious book?
Yeah. Yeah, I hope it's, first and foremost, representation is so important right now, and it's something that the publishing industry and other industries have seemed to embrace, at least to a degree, and allow different groups to tell those stories. And young Jewish kids are just as much of a part of that as any other group. So part of it is that I'm writing it for them, and it's an experience that I've had that I'm sure a lot of other Jewish kids have had or are having, and so hopefully they can find some representation, some of themselves in it. And the other part of that is there's also a lot of kids, not just Jewish, a lot of kids dealing with family members who have some sort of cognitive impairment, and it could be dementia or Alzheimer's, and there's not a lot of books out there for them. So part of the thought process behind that was having something that they can look at and see themselves in as well, and maybe have some sort of template to have a conversation with their parents about it, because I made that a pretty pivotal part of the book too, where the mom is starting to explain this to them. So what I hope they get away from it, anybody who's reading it, is just a sense that they're not alone and that they're loved in a world that can feel particularly unloving sometimes.
And then there's the whole food as comfort
Yeah,
as it relates to your history, but also your present and your future, right?
yeah, absolutely. And I've carried on traditions of making matzo ball soup, for my family on Passover, and making traditional meals during the holidays, which we enjoy. We've started. My wife and I just moved to San Francisco a couple of years ago, but I'm starting to re-implement Friday night Shabbat in the house, and so it's always around food to some degree. It's because it's a ritual, it's spiritual, it's nourishment, it's power. It's all of these things that we derive from food. And it literally, we can't live without it. So it's so important in our lives for many, many different reasons.
Do you remember your earliest food memory?
Uh, I I know this is probably going to be a cliche one, but I do remember for some reason when I was very young, and it was Baskin Robbins, so it wasn't necessarily the creme de la creme, as it were. But I remember experiencing ice cream for the first time, and I don't think that memory ever leaves you. And it's funny because I'm not much of a sweet tooth. In fact, I used to separate when I got birthday cake when I was a kid. I would take the frosting off because it was just too much for me, but for some reason, ice cream is still a memory that just has lodged itself in there as being this first really big opening sort of memory. But the other one is my grandmother's teriyaki wings that she used to make, um, which isn't very Jewish, funny enough. But she did this wonderful little like wing recipe that she would make when we would get together.
Nice. And I will make you play favorites. So, what is your favorite Jewish food? And then you could say what your favorite mainstreamy kind of food is. And
Sure.
they can be the same.
Yeah.
It
No,
doesn't
they're
have to
they're
be.
not. They're not. So I'm a lox guy. I really am. I don't know if that's kind of the meat and potatoes version of like Jews, but I love lox, and lox schmear capers on a good bagel. Yeah, it's hard to beat that. Um, so I'm
I didn't even get to my bagel question and you answered it. So, what kind of bagel is the lox and the schmear on?
so I from childhood, sesame seed was one that was always kind of prevalent and the one you go to. But I think in adulthood, I'm more of an all seed guy. As messy as it is, I need all of the flavors, the garlic and the poppy seeds and all of it. Yeah.
Okay, so this
Oh,
is
and
clearly
yeah.
not your mainstream favorite. So,
Yeah,
which
no.
one is that?
So my favorite mainstream food is probably uh, camarones a la diabla from a good taqueria, because I grew up in Salinas. It's this place on the central coast of California, and it's like 70 to 75% Mexican. There's a lot of migrant workers in that community, so there's fantastic taquerias everywhere, and I grew up around them. And that's a dish that I've always loved, which sort of suits me now because I've been pescatarian for a while. So, don't really indulge in the carne asada anymore, which is delicious too. All of the different cuts of meat. But yeah, the camarones a la diabla is a great meal for me outside of Jewish food.
And you clearly love to eat. Do you love to cook as well?
I do. I didn't in my younger years and in my sort of single years. So what I found is that when I got married, what I really love is to cook for other people. The thing is, if so for some reason in my head, there's this limitation where cooking for myself seems like too much of a hassle. So just make something simple. But yeah, once I had a girlfriend and then now my wife, it became this act of sort of love. It's like a love language. You make this meal for the people who you care about, and you're caring for them by doing that. So yeah, it's been something that I've kind of discovered later in life in my early to mid 30s, but I absolutely love it now, even if I tend to scream and get frustrated at times.
Do you have a signature dish, something that you love that you want to share? Because I don't think it's fair to talk about food without giving people a taste of what they can create out of the conversation.
Yeah, I do, and this is one that's kind of an easy dish too. So it is one that I probably still wouldn't make it for myself because there's a little bit too much prep to do that. But it is an easy one for like a family. So something like if my wife and I are working kind of late and we need to throw something together, this is a good one for that. And it's a vegan impossible meatloaf, which again also suits me well nowadays since I don't really eat meat. So it's also good. I'll mention for kosher houses, since there's, you don't have to worry about the meat and dairy being on separate plates since there's no meat in it. So that's how I'll tie it into the Judaism. Otherwise, it's probably kind of going, but it's delicious. So it's a package of Impossible Burger. It's a quarter cup of breadcrumbs, 2 tablespoons ketchup, a teaspoon of garlic powder. Sorry, a teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce, a teaspoon of onion powder, half teaspoon of parsley, quarter teaspoon of salt, and a quarter teaspoon of pepper. So the oven is preheated to 400 degrees. Then you just mix all of the ingredients together in the bowl, and I like to do it with my hands. If people want to do it with a spoon, or they have like a good mashing utensil, go for it. But there's something very kind of visceral and I don't know, rhapsodic about kind of getting your hands into dough, or like the meat. It hits all the pleasure centers. It's a very nice tactile thing. So I mix it all up in the bowl, and then you form it into kind of a meatloaf, like you would with a normal meatloaf. It bakes for about 25 to 30 minutes, and then I usually take it out after about that time. I'll usually set it in between there, so maybe 27 minutes. Check it when it has a few minutes left, and if it's nice and brown on the top, you throw a little bit of barbecue sauce or ketchup right on the top, pop it back in, and kind of let that brown and caramelize, and then you're good to go. And one of the other things too that makes it really easy, I've gotten into, again, matter of convenience or ease, I've gotten very into like one pan recipes. So with this one, you could put it on a pan, put some potatoes or Brussels sprouts or whatever other vegetable you like, and then you have a whole meal when it comes out.
Now, the thing with impossible meat is sometimes it actually doesn't taste like anything. I know that's kind of the point. So does this actually taste like what you remember from meatloaf?
It does, and I think like anything else, it's really about the seasoning. And most of the time when something's bland, it just needs a little salt or something. So, but if you're doing this right, and this recipe I found, it's sort of a modified version of what I found online, but the seasoning always tends to give it a nice kick, and then the sort of savory aspect with the sweet of the ketchup is a really nice combination too.
When you were talking about mixing with your hands, you really sounded like an artist. So for me, that sounded like a very artist thing to do. Do you do other sorts of artwork as well?
Yeah, I've been getting into painting recently. I had a friend who offered to teach me, and I've always wanted to learn. So he's been starting to teach me acrylics, and it's something that I'd love to progress with and learn more. I've also gotten into mycology in the last several years, which is the study of just different kind of fungi and mushrooms, and it's just a fascinating species to read about and think about. And I've watched documentaries on them, but I also want to say, sorry, I'm kind of on a tangent, but cooking, there's a lot of artistry to cooking, and especially nowadays, here in San Francisco, there's Michelin star restaurants, and these people are literally creating art that you can eat. So yeah, I consider a lot of things outside illustration, painting, something we would commonly think of as the arts. There's a lot of things outside that I think still qualify, and cooking is one of them.
I completely agree. I feel like cooking is one of the most creative, artistic things you can do.
Yeah, and satisfying because you can't eat a painting afterward. You get to eat this art. It's great.
It is great. It's edible art. I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Do you have any final food for thought, whether it's on the importance of food and community, or what it is that you love so much about food as subject matter?
Yeah, I think food does create community, and I think there can be some pressure on us at times to engage with that and be, you know, in a certain amount, or involved to a certain degree. And sometimes we could be told if we're not doing it right. And I think we all have our own sort of comfort levels, and food is a big part of I think bridging that gap between all different denominations and beliefs and practices and traditions. So it's something that really brings people together, and so I think people should just embrace that part of food. And it doesn't just have to be something that we eat to live. I know there's sort of the health conscious people and the sort of fitness influencers, and they'll tell you to meal prep and watch your calories or whatever it is. And that's all well and good, but I also think we have one life to live and we have to allow ourselves to enjoy it, and food is a huge part of that, and especially when it relates to your community, your family. It just bridges all those gaps and brings people together, and food really does have that power to do it.
Very well put. Thank you so much, Alex Schumacher, for
Thank
joining
you.
me today. Where can people learn more about you and your book?
My website is alexschumacherart, all one word, .com. And I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, handles the same at all of them, at AJ Schumacher Art.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for sharing this very personal, creative expression of food and family.
My
And
privilege. Thank you for having me.
thank you for tuning in to Taste Buds with Deb. Don't miss an episode. You can subscribe on YouTube, iTunes, and or your favorite podcast platform. And go to jewishjournal.com/podcast to get the recipe and read the articles. Learn more at tastebudswithdeb.com. Until next time, bon appetit.